And hi, Joanne. Oh, we lost Helen now.
We got a note from her. There was a chat. Let's see what it said.
Well, how's everybody doing? Don't
Good.
sound
Here.
don't sound so excited for this. Come on, folks. Uh, just to quickly get us up to speed, we're coming into a really interesting section of the book of Isaiah. It's this point where God is pronouncing judgment on some of the areas around. He came down pretty hard on Babylon last week, or last time we were together. We saw that he had some harsh things to say about Babylon, which, as we pointed out, was really interesting because at this point, Babylon is nothing, but they are going to grow into a very huge power. Right now, at this point, Assyria is the big, nasty, ugly power. You have Egypt down to the south, Assyria's to the north and east, and Babylon is starting to grow, but not quite there yet. But it ended with this mockery of Babylon, where he's comparing the king of Babylon to Satan, saw him fall. And the overarching theme of that judgment is Babylon's arrogance and pride. And that's going to be kind of the overarching theme of these next few chapters as God is dealing with the nations surrounding Israel and Judah. And there's that constant theme that runs through it of arrogance and pride, rejecting God, lifting themselves up, and thinking that they are greater than anything else. To me, one of the most fascinating chapters, or two chapters in the book of Isaiah, is chapter 15 and 16, where he's dealing with the nation of Moab. Let's see if I got this here. Hang on a second. Okay, can everybody see that?
No.
My screen sharing isn't sharing. Okay. How about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the northern kingdom, Israel. Here's the southern kingdom, Judah. Moab is this little nation that's located right here on the eastern shore of the Dead Sea. Moab has been a pain in the side for the Israelites from the beginning. When Israelites were coming up out of Egypt, heading into the promised land, they had to pass along that eastern shore of the Dead Sea. They went up a little bit north of that, crossed over the Jordan River, and went into the promised land. When they got to Moab, the king of Moab, Balak, was afraid. Because by this time, the Israelites were 1.5 million people strong. That's not a small party of people. And he had seen what they had done to some of the neighboring countries when they were coming through. If they were welcomed, they simply passed on through. If they ran into resistance, sometimes they would fight. But most of all, you're thinking you're king of a smaller country. You've got 1.5 million people coming in. What are they going to need? Food. Even though God was providing them with manna, Balak didn't know that. He's looking at this out of fear, thinking these guys are going to wipe out everything we have to eat. So when they asked permission to pass through, Balak refused at first. In fact, he went so far as to get his chief priest and prophet Balaam to go out and curse the Israelites. And Balaam couldn't do that because he was hearing the words of the Lord, who was basically saying, bless them. And so as Balak was getting angrier and angrier, Balaam was praising the Israelites and blessing them. And so you've got this tension there. But the bigger thing is that resistance against God's people. It's not surprising that that would happen, because all throughout history, people have been resisting God's people. I mean, Moab itself has a very interesting origin. Go back to the time of Abraham and his nephew Lot and Sodom and Gomorrah. And Lot had been living in Sodom, and when God was raining down the judgment, Lot left. His daughters came with him. They went up into the hillside and were hanging out in a cave. All the daughters knew was that they had just watched these two major cities get totally destroyed, and they just figured that we're the only ones left. And they wanted to carry on a lineage. So they got their dad drunk, not once, but twice. And each one of them, the oldest daughter first, and then the youngest, slept with Lot, had a child. One of those child's name was Moab. He went on and started this country. He was the founder, the founding father of that country of Moab. So from the very beginning, there was this animosity towards God and God's plan. And now we come to this point where Moab is about to be judged for so many different things. But there's also this underlying thread that Moab had also been a place of refuge for so many Israelites, that when stuff was getting bad in the land, they would flee to Moab. And so you have this struggle between the good part of Moab, the ones who were welcoming and supporting, and the bad part that were bringing mockery and ridicule against the Israelites. And it's into that as a context, as a backdrop, that God is giving these words to Isaiah. So who would like to read in chapter 15, verses 1 through, let's go all the way to the end. Who would like to read chapter 15? Susan, go for it, please.
An oracle concerning Moab. Because Ar is laid waste in a night, Moab is undone. Because Kir is laid waste in a night, Moab is undone. The daughter of Dibon has gone up to the high places to weep. Over Nebo and over Medeba, Moab wails. On every head is baldness, every beard is shorn. In the streets they gird on sackcloth, on the housetops and in the squares. Everyone wails and melts in tears. Heshbon and Elahle cry out. Their voice is heard as far as Jahaz. Before the armed men of Moab cry aloud. His soul trembles. My heart cries out for Moab. His fugitives flee to Zoar, to Eglath Shalishia, at the ascent of Luhith. They go up weeping on the road to Horonaim. They raise a cry of destruction. The waters of Nimrin are a desolation. The grass is withered. The new growth fails. The verdure is no more. Therefore, the abundance they have gained and what they have laid up, they carry away over the brook of the willows. For a cry has gone round the land of Moab. The wailing reaches to Egalim. The wailing reaches to Elam, for the waters of Dibon are full of blood. Yet I will bring upon Dibon even more, a lion for those of Moab who escape, for the remnant of the land. I probably
Thanks.
mispronounced half the words, but a hard one.
You did really good. Really good. Yeah, those were tough ones. Isaiah is seeing the struggle and destruction of Moab. The Assyrians are going to come down, sweep down into that, and they are going to ransack Moab. But what he's also seeing here, not so much the land, but the people. He's seeing as the people are shaving their heads and putting on sackcloth and shaving their beards, signs of mourning and lament. A little bit different attitude than when he was seeing what was happening in Babylon. Here he's seeing it and he's looking at it with a different set of eyes. In verse 5, he says, "My heart cries out over Moab and for her people." Even though he knows that this is God's judgment, his heart is crying out. He's weeping for their weeping. It's kind of like when Jesus was overlooking Jerusalem and saying, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, my heart weeps for you." Now, knowing that God is going to judge, Isaiah's heart is crying. Interesting twist on how he was feeling about Babylon. When he's looking at Babylon, he's saying, these guys are going to get what they deserve. When he's looking at Moab, there's a closeness. There is a personal side of this that he's feeling differently about them. What can we learn from that? Ooh, I've stumped them with the first question.
Well, to be understanding and not critical of your opponents, of understanding and relating to them and feeling their pain as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Empathy. Having empathy for the people around us. Isaiah can't stop what's going to happen, but he doesn't have to like it. I think as God's people, sometimes we're lacking in empathy, or sometimes we go off the deep end and we want to try to save and rescue everybody from the situations that they're facing. It's that fine line. It's that fine line, because sometimes we are called to simply be there and support. Other times we're called to step into the gap and help. And other times we're called to simply just be the ones to proclaim, the truth into it all. There's no right or wrong for every situation. And that's where this whole idea of listening to God comes in. And that's what Isaiah is doing here. He's listening to God and taking his direction from God himself. Instead of trying to do it on his own, And I also love the fact that he's showing his humanity. He's showing that even though he is a man who's proclaiming the word of God, still at the very base of it all, he is human and has a human heart, a heart that aches. Who else have we talked about recently over this Christmas season who was that same way, who was very human and had a heart who ached? Kind of
Right?
a foreshadowing. It's foreshadowing of Christ.
Yeah.
Yeah. Who would like to read chapter 16, verses 1 through 5 for me, please?
I'm going.
Okay, Marty, go for it.
Okay. Just a second.
We can't hear you. Can't hear you. You're still muted.
Hmm.
There we go. Nope, you're muted again.
Okay.
Okay, send lambs from Selah to tribute to the ruler of the land. Send them through the desert to the mountain of beautiful Zion. The women of Moab are left like homeless birds at the shallow crossing of the Arnon River. Help us, they cry. Defend us against our enemies. Protect us from their relentless attack. Do not betray us now that we have escaped. Let our refugees stay among you. Hide them from our enemies until the terror is past. When the oppression and destruction have ended and the enemy raiders have disappeared, then God will establish one of David's descendants as king. He will rule with mercy and truth. He will always do what is just and will be eager to do what is right.
Thanks. I love how this section ends with another little vision of the Messiah. This little glimpse of Christ. All throughout Isaiah, we get these little glimpses, these promises, and it's usually in conjunction with things that are bad. You know, Moab is going to be destroyed. The people are going to be mourning and wailing. I love the definition of like fluttering birds pushed from the nest. You know, the people are wandering around looking for where they are going to call home. It starts with this interesting statement, send lambs as tribute to the ruler of the land. When David was ruling, the Moabites would send a tribute to David. They would basically say, David, you are the king, and they would send him 100,000 lambs. That stopped. And now at this point, there's this broken relationship between the Israelites and the Moabites. For a while, there was peace. And what God is saying is, get back to what you used to be doing. You used to be willing to live in harmony with your neighbors. And now they're an adversary. And the Moabites are saying, we don't really want to do that, but we want you to protect us. Give us counsel. Make your shadow like night at high noon. Hide us, protect us. The Moabites want Judah to protect them, but they don't want to do what it's going to take. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, yeah. How often do we do that with God? God, we want you to save us. We want you to protect us, but I don't want to stop hating my neighbor. I don't want to stop being the mean, nasty, ugly guy on the block, but I want you to make them stop throwing eggs at my house. Not that that happens, but just it's that same mindset. Is the Moabites wanted the protection of Judah, but on their terms. Does God play that game? Do we play that game with God? Yeah, quite often we do. We do.
So what's the work they had to do? What did the Moabites have to do to get this protection?
To stop being so mean and nasty and ugly.
Oh.
They were not good neighbors. From the outset, they weren't. But then there was this period where there was a little peace. There was some tension, but there was peace. And then they started to become prideful and arrogant again, rejecting God, going through the motions of worshiping, but not really worshiping. And at its base root of this division between the Israelites and the Moabites was religion. Because that was the one thing that really, really was bad about their treatment of the Israelites. Not so much that they opposed them, not so much that they kind of mumbled and complained. They did let them pass through. But what they did, I am really outnumbered here by being the only man saying this to a group of women. The Moabite women seduced the Israelite men to come worship their God. The men went willingly, and it's hard to blame them, but you do, because the Moabites worshipped, basically, it was a god of fertility, goddess of fertility, and they would go up on these high places, these high mountains and everything, and have knockdown, drag out, drunken orgies. And now you're an Israelite man, you've been walking through the desert, you've been stopping to worship very formally this God who shows up as a pillar of fire and a pillar of smoke. And you're going through that, and all of a sudden you get invited to the party. And you see how fun the party is. And you look at what you have and you go, we got Moses. They've got, yeah. That was the underlying rub of God's judgment against Moab. He also judged his own people. 24,000 Israelite men perished because they had turned from God to worship the goddess of Moab. God doesn't mess around. But that was the underlying issue. They were prideful, they were arrogant, and they were trying to lead the people astray. Their worship was in vain. Yes, Marilyn.
Wasn't either Ruth or Naomi a Moabite?
Ruth.
Ruth was, okay.
Yeah.
So there's, I don't know, it feels like God has room for redemption and restoration for everybody that he comes in contact with, and they get to be in the lineage. Yeah.
Yep. But it all is the matter of the heart. Ruth had the heart to do the hard work. And she left everything behind to go with Naomi and said, okay, your God is not my God. Versus the ones who stood behind and said, I like our God better. She's more fun. Who would like to read verse 6 through all the way through the end of the chapter? Hulda, would you be willing to read that? I'm kind of curious what the message says.
Sure. I don't know how to pronounce anything, but I'll do my best.
That's okay. You can either try to struggle through it or just when you get to it, just say the first letter of the word.
Okay. Everyone's heard of Moab's pride, world famous for pride, arrogant, self-important, insufferable, full of hot air. So now let Moab lament for a change, with antiphonal mock laments from the neighbors. What a shame, how terrible, no more fine fruit cakes and Kerharaseth candies. All those lush Heshbon fields dried up, the rich Sibma vineyards withered. Foreign thugs have crushed and torn out the famous grapevines that once reached all the way to Jazer, right to the edge of the desert, ripped out the crops in every direction as far as the eye can see. I'll join the weeping. I'll weep right along with Jazer, weep for the Sibna vineyards, and yes, Heshbon and Alela. I'll mingle my tears with your tears. The joyful shouting at harvest is gone. Instead of song and celebration, dead silence. No more boisterous laughter in the orchards. No more hearty work songs in the vineyards. Instead of the bustle and sound of good work in the fields, silence, deathly and deadening silence. My heartstrings throb like harp strings for Moab, my soul in sympathy for sad Keharis. When Moab trudges to the shrine to pray, he wastes both time and energy. Going to the sanctuary and praying for relief is useless. Nothing ever happens. This is God's earlier message on Moab. God's updated message is, in 3 years, no longer than the term of an enlisted soldier, Moab's impressive presence will be gone. That splendid hot air balloon will be punctured, and instead of a vigorous population, just a few shuffling bums panhandling handouts.
I like that. I like that. The hot air balloon will be punctured. My tears mingle with your tears. Peterson has a way with words that I really, really enjoy. Here's the overall image that's going on here. Moab is going to be decimated. A place that was known for fertile fields and vineyards, it's going to be wiped out. And I really, really, really like my heart laments for Moab like a harp, my inner being. Isaiah is moved on a very gut-wrenching level over what's happening. And he can't stop it. And I think the hardest part for him was knowing that these people keep trudging off to their temple. They keep coming up and praying, and nothing is going to happen. Think back to the very opening part of the book of Isaiah when he talks about the worship of the Israelites. When you lift up your arms to pray, I don't hear. God has turned his back on the prayers of his people because they were worshiping in vain. They were going through the motions, saying the words, bringing the sacrifices, but their heart wasn't in it. And Isaiah knows that this is the same thing that the Moabites are going through. They're showing up to put in the motion of worshiping and praying, and nothing is going to change. In fact, as God said, within 3 years, it's going to be over. Question. If you knew that within a certain time frame, God was going to judge you or your family or your friends or whoever, unless you changed, how would you take that message?
Time to straighten up and fly right. But I suppose some people would go, well, okay, I've got like 2 years and 11 months to mess around, and then I have to straighten up and fly right.
And you'd have to believe that God is so strong that he could terrorize you or finish you off or whatever he's going to do. I mean, if you didn't believe him, they must have, you'd have to see what the Israelites were seeing to accept that he could actually do that to you. And maybe some people wouldn't.
Yeah, you'd have to decide to yourself, I do need to straighten up and fly right. If you can acknowledge your own sinfulness and lack of faith, that has to come first, of course.
Which is
I think
really
I'd feel
difficult.
I'd feel the same way as Isaiah, because I know there's so many people that wouldn't listen, people that I care about.
Yeah. Yeah. That's hard. That's hard. It's hard when you see people that you love doing things that you know are harmful. And you can't stop it. And that's why Isaiah can sit there and watch this, and his heart is aching. His insides are churning. His gut is churning because he knows what's going to happen. And it's in a very short period of time, 3 years. And that's what happened. Within 3 years, the Assyrians come in and decimated Moab. Nice, uplifting section here. This whole section is hard because we see God bringing judgment for all of Israel's neighbors. Some of these go back, some of these affronts go back hundreds and hundreds of years. You know, it was 650 years since the Israelites had gone up and passed by Moab and gone into the promised land. But yet, when God says he's going to judge, he's going to judge. When God says, treat my people well or else, well, he's going to do the or else. But sometimes the nations got lax. because of that very thing, that they didn't think God would do it. He hadn't done it yet. It's been 600 some years, and he still just let us go. Think of humans who get away with things for years and years and years and years. And suddenly now they're faced with the consequences of years and years and years of misaction. How do they usually respond? I'm asking a bunch of tough questions today.
Well, some might ask for immediate forgiveness. Some might.
Some.
I was thinking of Assad, who ran and hid with Putin, another criminal, ran to him for safety. So not at all repentant, just sorry he got caught.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There was a really telling picture, I think it was in yesterday's paper, of a toppled statue, huge toppled statue of Assad's father. It's like it's laying in the dust, it's crumbled. There's your legacy.
Yeah.
And good riddance.
I love that image because that's kind of the underlying theme through all of this section of Isaiah is nations come, nations go, rulers come, rulers go. But through it all, God is sovereign. Sometimes God will move soon. Sometimes God will wait. Sometimes God will wait 650 years. Sometimes God will wait until the very end. But at the end, God is eventually going to bring judgment. And we tend to think that we, in this time in space and history, are smarter, more powerful, richer, more educated, above reproach, above fail than anybody else who's ever come before us. And God laughs. And God laughs. Because we're no different than anybody else. Assad was no different than Balak. Prideful, arrogant rulers who think they're above reproach. And, well, we see how that kind of goes. But I'll get off my political soapbox now. Who would like to read chapter 17, verses 1 through 8 for me, please? Marilyn, go for it.
Okay, this is the New American Standard Version. The oracle concerning Damascus. Behold, Damascus is about to be removed from being a city, and it will become a fallen ruin. The cities of Arior are forsaken. They will be for flocks to lie down in, and there will be no one to frighten them. The fortified city will disappear from Ephraim, and sovereignty from Damascus, and the remnant of Aram. They will be like the glory of the sons of Israel, declares the Lord of hosts. Now it will come about in that day that the glory of Jacob will fade, and the fatness of his flesh will become lean. It will be even like the reaper gathering the standing grain, as his arm harvests the ears. Or it will be like one gleaning ears of grain in the valley of Rephaim. Yet gleanings will be left in it like the shaking of an olive tree, 2 or 3 olives on the topmost bough, 4 or 5 on the branches of a fruitful tree, declares the Lord, the God of Israel. In that day, man will have regard for his Maker, and his eyes will look to the Holy One of Israel. And he will not have regard for the altars, the work of his hands, nor will he look to that which his fingers have made. Even the Asherim and incense stands.
Thanks. Damascus still is the capital of Syria, a little bit north of the northern kingdom. It's different than Assyria. Let's see if we can. Syria is here, north of Lebanon. The northern kingdom is here. Assyria is over here. These guys are the big, nasty, ugly ones that God is raising up. Syria to the north was kind of a minor nuisance. There were a lot of trade routes that came through that area. So the Syrians wanted to be on good stead with their neighbors because they wanted that trade to be able to keep flowing freely from Egypt to the south, all the way up along the Mediterranean coast. Because of being situated on the trade routes like that, they had a whole bunch of different influences religiously. But there was a remnant of Syrians who were God worshippers. And what this section is saying is that when I bring judgment on those people, there will be a faithful remnant. He compared it to, gleaning the olive tree when you're beating the branches. Not all of the olives fall to be harvested. There's some that are left up there, saying there is going to be a faithful remnant that turn back to God. They don't turn to their man-made idols. They don't turn to things that they've made by hand. They turn their eyes to the Holy One of Israel. I like that. I like that. Is that even though there's going to be yucky stuff going on, there's going to be a faithful remnant that will carry through. That's another theme that runs through a lot of Isaiah. This idea of a faithful remnant. It's not in everyone. When he's judging Babylon, he's more or less saying that Babylon, the city, is going to be wiped out. There's nothing left. And that is true. The city of Babylon got wiped out and got rebuilt later in another place. But at the time of their judgment, there's nothing left. But there's this idea, is that, oh, we had an actual Helen sighting for a moment.
It was upside down though.
But it was Helen.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I cling to, is we see the world going crazy. And I have no clue what the future holds. But what I can cling to is that God has promised to preserve his faithful. And as long as I keep clinging to him, no matter what goes on in the world around me, I'm going to be okay. Because in a nutshell, isn't that the message of the gospel? No matter what's going on in the world around us, God has reached into this mess and brought us hope and peace and salvation. And as long as we hang on to that, does anything else really, truly matter? We think it does. We get crazy sometimes over things. But at the end of the day, the only thing that truly matters is my relationship with God. I can't control anybody else's relationship to God. I can hope and pray for them, and I can do everything I can to point people to God. But at the end of the day, it's me and him. I love that through this section, we get these little glimpses of what is truly important. What is truly important is clinging to him. So who would like to read verse 9 through 14 for me? Go for it, Catherine. Ellen!
In person. Can't talk, can't hear.
Can't talk, can't hear.
I think she can hear.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. In that day, their strong cities, which they left because of the Israelites, will be like places abandoned to thickets and undergrowth, and all will be desolation. You have forgotten God, your Savior. You have not remembered the rock, your fortress. Therefore, though you set out the finest plants and plant imported vines, though on the day you set them out, you make them grow, and on the morning when you plant them, you bring them to bud, yet the harvest will be as nothing in the day of disease and incurable pain. Oh, the raging of many nations, they rage like the raging sea. Oh, the uproar of the peoples, they roar like the roaring of great waters. Although the peoples roar like the roar of surging waters, when he rebukes them, they flee far away, driven before the wind like chaff on the hills, like tumbleweed before a gale. In the evening, sudden terror. Before the morning, they are gone. This is the portion of those who loot us, the lot of those who plunder us.
Thanks. Isaiah has some fascinating imagery. And this idea of you plant a vine in the morning, and when it comes time to harvest, there's nothing there. The people of Damascus, again, were haughty, proud. They thought that because they were doing all of these great and wonderful things that they would be blessed. The reality was, no. Has nothing to do with them and what they were doing. It was everything to do what God was using them for. And when they stopped doing what God was using them for, which was to be a buffer between the people in the north and the Israelites, to be that open trade route that people would be able to go through, to be allies of the northern kingdom. But there were times when they turned their backs on that. They joined up with other forces to invade the south, or they joined up with other forces to repel the northern kingdom of Israel when they were coming in to invade them. It was this interesting border battle for years, going back and forth. But at the end of the day, I like how he uses that imagery of like a tumbleweed before a gale. Powerless to stand before a God when God moves and acts. And Isaiah says, this is the portion, or this is the payback for those who loot us and plunder us. And that's what the Syrians would do. When they would come into the northern kingdom, into Israel, they would loot, they would plunder, they would take the best, and then they would leave. They never came down and established permanent residency. They would just kind of do these little raids historically and come down and be mean and nasty and ugly for a while and then take what they could and go back up, thinking they got away with it. And here, God is telling them that, no, payback's mine. You will eventually get what's coming. But again, there's that faithful remnant piece that runs through all of this. Are you with me so far on this? We've had a lot of words talking about a lot of different concepts. The overall thing that we want to take away from this section is that even though God is going to bring judgment, he doesn't like it. He doesn't like having to do it. It's like my mom would always tell me before she'd spank me and ground me, this is going to hurt me a lot more than it's going to hurt you. You know, funny, I was the one that had the sword behind, but I understand now what she meant. And that's what Isaiah is feeling here. Even though God is going to chastise and punish the people, doesn't like it. Doesn't like it. And in that overall message, we get these little glimmers of hope and little snippets of the coming of the Messiah. And I don't know about you, but looking at the world around us today, boy, we could sure use that glimmer of hope. Yes, Joanne.
I was wondering why an American city would choose to call itself Moab.
Because they probably aren't very smart.
Just a different sect, and yeah, I mean, he says it's going to be destroyed, and it was. I don't know.
Yeah,
kind of funny.
Maybe they were haughty and proud like the Moabites, or maybe they just liked Ruth, or maybe they just thought it was a really cool name.
Yeah,
yeah, it could be. Well, that's all I got, folks. Any comments, questions? Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
You too.
Thanks very
Thank
much,
you.
Basil.